Hello, I'm Blair, and welcome to Cellar Notes. Today we're going to talk about Australia, and joining us is Anthony Hendry. Anthony, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks very much, Blair.
You work with a group called Negotiants. We'll talk about that, but first, can you give us a little bit of your background and what you've been doing in the industry?
I came here about 7 years ago from Adelaide, South Australia, my little old hometown, and spent 4 years in New York, which was a quantum leap from my little old town in Adelaide. And now I find myself living in Chicago some 3 years later. So 7 years total in the US, and it's been quite a ride.
Wonderful. And what exactly do you do with Negotiants, and what are they?
My role with Negotiants is their Central Territory Manager, so effectively looking after the Midwest. I've got 10 states that I try and look after as best I can, but it's a challenge all round and something that I really enjoy doing.
So you represent several different wineries then, or is it one specific winery? I know we're talking about one of the more famous ones, Yalumba, today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Negotiants is a very good company in terms of their importability. They also import into Australia as well. So quite well integrated, and it's owned by the Hill Smith family, who is a very, very proud company, Yalumba, in Adelaide, or certainly their home is in Barossa. Very respectful, and certainly in Australia, Yalumba is held in very high regard. It took me 20 years to get a job with Yalumba, and it's something that I'm very proud of, and I can see myself working for this company for quite a while.
Excellent. Are there a lot of family-run wineries in Australia, or is this kind of out of the norm now?
I think if you wind it all the way back to 200 years ago, when wine was really introduced to Australia, they really were farmers, and they still are. We're really talking about primary industry, people who roll the sleeves up and get their hands dirty. And I think in the last 20 years, certainly in the US, one of the first questions that I got asked when I first came here is, are these the wines that Australians drink? Are these the wines that, we'd like to see more? We see a lot of Shiraz, a lot of Chardonnay, and in fact in Australia there's over 1,000 different wine varieties planted. Wow. And I think over time, and I think the evolution and the maturity of the marketplace will start to demand those varietals, which we know in Australia we've been growing for a long time, and we do it very well. I guess what we are doing ourselves is trying to work out from a region to region standpoint what works and what doesn't, and certainly in the last, at least since the mid-80s, when consumption of table wine was overtaken by, overtook consumption of fortified wine, because that's what we were known for back in the early days, making fortified wine for the mother country. And certainly things have changed a lot since then, and certainly the thirst for the US consumer for our wines has been exceptional in the last 20 years. So I think what you've seen in the last 5, even maybe 2 or 3 years, that inception of different varietals and different styles, which really, from an Australian standpoint, we're not heavily regulated, so we do have the ability to grow varieties in any part of all of our regions within Australia. And I think the diversity is something that you're starting to see a lot more of from Adelaide, and certainly from Australia.
Yep, and that's a good point. I think that Australia was known for the big producers with the colorful labels, and I think the trend seems to be going away from that, and people want to know the true Australia and what wines actually represent Australia.
Absolutely, it's a very good point. I mean, we've seen a lot in the last, I guess, 30 years ago, when the great Len Evans introduced the wines to the US, and certainly with Paul Hogan with Shrimp on a Barbie. I was
hoping you'd say that eventually.
It was a great introduction to the Australian wine industry, to the US consumer, and certainly Shiraz and Chardonnay was hugely embraced. And we, as a home market, we're probably only growing at about 2% consumption rate, and then all of a sudden the thirst for Australian wines here in the US grew to something in excess of 15%.
Exploded would be a good word.
Absolutely exploded, and so we couldn't bottle it quick enough, effectively. So what we've seen in the more recent past is more of a thirst for for more characteristics, and you know,
Right.
people are demanding a little bit more. I guess with information on the internet these days, people are seeing that there is more to Australia than Shiraz and Chardonnay. So I challenge your viewers to go out and search and explore and discover these new varietals, which certainly from an Australian standpoint have been around forever. But it's nice to see that consumers are starting to demand more from us.
One varietal that I know that you're very proud of and impressed with, and rightfully so, is the Viognier, and the way that grape is used by itself, used as a blending, and the way it rides the fence. I think that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. It's not a Cabernet. It's not a Shiraz. It's not well understood. Can you just give us a few pointers on the characteristics of the, for example, the Yalumba?
Yeah, the Viognier is really interesting. I mean, Yalumba took a stand in 1980 with their relationship with French producers such as Gigal to go and search for a different varietal that's going to be conducive to our growing conditions in Australia. And certainly we never have a problem with sunlight in Australia, so ripening fruit is never an issue. In the northern parts of Rhone, we get that really nice cool climate Shiraz, and certainly with that, from time to time, a certain percentage blending of Viognier. So Louisa Rose, who is our chief winemaker, and Brian Walsh, the director of winemaking at Yalumba, made a discovery or took it upon themselves to champion a variety. And Viognier is certainly a variety that in Eden Valley, which is one of our cool climate, highly elevated areas in the Barossa, a variety that really lends itself to a different style. You know, it's not Chardonnay, it's not Sauvignon Blanc, but to me it's like the crossroads of all of those varieties. So what do you see in Viognier? You tend to see a little bit more of that sort of apricot and honeysuckle on the nose, and then on the finish quite clean, and a little bit of apricot on the finish too. So it's a different style. To me, if you think about Australians and what we do, we spend 80% of our time outside and the other 20% wishing we were outside. So a lot of our living is all about outdoors. Salad and seafood is certainly something that we put on our plates often, and a lot of our wines tend to have that nice crisp refinement to them, and that's what we're looking for in a style. So if you look at unoaked Chardonnay and Viognier and any of our whites, Riesling as well from Australia, 9 times out of 10 they're going to be pretty dry and very food complementary.
That's a good point. A lot of these wines really do complement food very well. We mentioned Barossa and other regions. In California, you know, there's Napa, there's Sonoma, governed by the AVA. In Australia, it's GI.
GI, yes.
Which stands for?
Geographical Indicator.
Okay, and they have the same type thing. So can we go over a few of the areas or growing areas and what produces best in those areas and why?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about Australia, and probably one thing that gets a little bit overlooked, because Australian wine is not just Australian wine. There's quite a bit of diversity in Australia. And if you think about France for 1 second, because we tend to refer to the European.
Sure.
If we could buy Cabernet in other parts of France other than Bordeaux, we would see some characteristical differences within those varietals. You don't see that in France because they're heavily regulated and you can only buy Cabernet from one region. However, in Australia we're very lucky. We can plant Cabernet or Shiraz or any other variety in any region, and that gives us the opportunity to provide this diversity that Australians have done so well. Our ability to blend Cabernet and Shiraz is something that we've done very well, and blending things like Shiraz and Viognier as well in a Côte Rôtie Northern Rhone style is something that we proud ourselves on because of our ability to grow outstanding Viognier. So in terms of regions in Australia, there's over 60 regions in Australia. I'm not going to ask you to try and remember them all today, but I think if you, obviously Barossa is one of those regions. Sure. That, you know, Barossa is to Australia what Napa is to Cabernet, and certainly something that I want your viewers to think about is exploring the regions. You'll start to get some different varietal differences within Australia, and so what we're trying to illustrate with all of our wines is regionality, and trying to introduce people to, you know, Margaret River and Coonawarra, McLaren Vale, Barossa, Clare Valley, and even Victoria, and certainly northeastern Victoria in the King Valley. Quite a cool climate area, cool growing area. Yarra Valley and the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, 2 other cool climate areas, and even Tasmania, which we don't see a lot of Tasmanian wines here. It's a very cool growing area, and we have a great sparkling called Jance from that region, which you know, there is a lot of diversity, and I challenge all of your viewers and customers to go back to Australian wine and demand a little bit more and say, you know, what is it about regionality and what makes it so special? And we know that, but I guess in 30 years you've come from the big box and moving through that and sort of saying to yourself, you know, we want a little bit more, and what is it about Australia that makes it so good?
Sure, absolutely. We talked about, you know, there's obviously a very rich history in Australia and wine growing. Where do you see Australia going in the future? What's down the road for Australia in the business?
You know, Australia is a very proud winemaking country. Yalumba, once again, just being the oldest family-owned winery, very proud, very humble about their history, and something that we pride ourselves on. I mean, a lot of the employees have worked with Yalumba for a very long time, and for good reason. I mean, they're sustainable farmers. Their ability to respect everyone within the industry, whether you're selling the wine in Lakeville Liquors in Minnesota to picking the fruit at Oxford Landing. It's certainly something that the Hill-Smith family pride themselves on respect throughout the whole industry. They're very well integrated. Certainly Negociants is a company that imports a lot of wine into Australia. Some of the famous brands around the world are imported into Australia. And being able to export, that ability to be able to make these wines that Australians drink more accessible to the American consumer. We don't produce wines with slapped on labels. We're not interested in cartoon characters. We're interested in providing you with the wines that Australians drink day in and day out. So we provide great value and excellent quality where people can be assured that responsible farming practices are something that we pride ourselves on. Very nice,
and you did touch on that, the sustainability and the responsible farming practices. You know, here we call it going green, I guess.
Yeah.
So that is practiced in Australia and at Yalumba then?
Absolutely. It's you know, it's all about being responsible and environmental. There's also a property that Wyndham Hill-Smith planted in 1959 in the Murray River region at Oxford Landing, which is an actual place that people can go to. And certainly the sustainable farming goes a little bit further. We do a lot of regeneration of vegetation and tree planting and whatnot. So just trying to think about putting back what we take out. So it's something that we absolutely pride ourselves on, you know, managing wastewater and certainly with irrigation and drip irrigation, and just being a responsible consumer.
It's the responsible way to do things.
Absolutely.
Anthony, I want to thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Blair.
joining me here today, and thank you for being with us here on Cellar Notes. And I got to say it, cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.